Hi, my name is Juliette, and I am the creator and host of Connecting the Dots podcast. I love ideas and problem solving, and my career in communication has led me down the path of curiosity, why we do what we do, how we tell better stories, and how African scientists solve everyday problems. And today, I am joined by none other than Dr. Rose Oronje, who's a distinguished expert in development policy and strategic communications with over 20 years in leadership advancing evidence-informed policymaking across Africa. She has recently been promoted and is now the Deputy Director at the African Institute for Development Policy, and her work has and continues to shape African government's policy actions in health, population, governance, and other development sectors. Karibu sana, Rose.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Rose, you've been doing the work that you've been doing for such a long time now. What does it entail and why is it important?
So I'll start with talking about why it's important. My work enables governments to make better policies, better decisions, better budgeting and spending, and better programming to address development issues. That's why it's important.
Yeah.
What I do on a day-to-day basis to enable them do that is to provide research and other types of evidence that the governments need. And we all know that governments do use research, but often it disappears, particularly when it comes to political issues around funds, issues around programming for better results. And so the work that I do involves providing research, providing data that they need. Often that's not readily available in many cases. But it also involves strengthening capacities at individual level to support technical officers to find, synthesize and use evidence, but also capacity in looking at institutions, like which structures do they need as government to ensure they have ready access to evidence.
And what inspired you to go into this area of work?
Right. So I did my first degree in information science many years ago, Moore University. And the focus of that was on media and communications and publishing. That was one component. There was a component on IT. There was a component on library. There was a component on archives. So I focused on media and communication because as a child, I always wanted to be able to express myself very clearly.
Yeah.
And so I automatically went into media and communications.
Yeah. Not literature or poetry or something.
Not really. I actually loved, I used to think of myself as someone who would be on TV anchoring news.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I can see it.
And so I automatically, when I did that degree in information science, automatically from the beginning, I knew I wanted to do media and communications with the hope that I would end up in TV. I didn't, but ended up in research.
Okay.
So my first job was at Institute of Public Policy Analysis, IPA. Then it was an NGO that had been set up to support government in better use of research in decision making. And so my role there was, I was a publications officer, so supporting the editing, production of publications. I guess as I worked there the first year, I just kept thinking this work is so important for changing the challenges we face as Kenyans.
Yeah.
The institute was focused on Kenya.
Yeah.
And so as I would be editing reports, going through what they found and what it means, I'll be sitting there thinking, okay, so what? Like, this is fantastic, but then how are we going to get this to government? And then government then translates it to programs, to service provision for just better lives for Kenyans.
Yeah.
So that is where I got the just the urge, to keep engaging the researchers and saying, okay, we can't stop at the publication. We need to get to the media.
Yeah.
We need to have discussion with the government to see how this research actually gets into action that government can take to improve people's lives.
Okay. And I know somewhere in between there in our research, there was political science. So how did you transition from media, comms, all the way now to even deputy director?
Right.
Yeah.
So I worked at IPA for 2 years. I moved on to the African Population and Health Research Center, where I was the communications manager for 6 years. Now, within those first roles of my career, the focus was really communications, typically communications, so supporting researchers to communicate better, but also to engage better. And then I got really interested in how does, so how do governments make the decisions they make? And how come research doesn't always play that role?
Yeah.
Because as someone who is passionate about research, I really wanted it to make a difference in people's lives.
Right.
And then on many occasions, just like, you just see the research hanging around in journals, in papers.
On shelves.
Yeah, so that's why I was like, I really need to understand, like, at what point do they decide it's not important to look at research and that we just go on with policy decisions? And I realized that because working at APHRC meant that we would actually have dialogues and you're discussing things with policymakers. And then sometimes you realize the decisions made don't
just arbitrary.
they don't take into account the research you found.
Yeah.
So I got really interested in the policy process. Like, why do policymakers do what they do? You know, and so as part of that, but also I would say that being at APHRC, I was working with a lot of researchers. And I think that maybe rubbed on me as well, because I just kept thinking I really need to understand how do we make research more useful for governments, because that is the point when it actually gets to change people's lives. So I got a scholarship. Part of working at APHRC meant that we had opportunities for scholarships through some of the research programs. So in one of the years, there was a research program we were partnering with various institutions, including IDS, Institute of Development Studies, at the University of Sussex. And so in that consortium, there's opportunity for PhD fellowships.
Oh, wow.
You know, and so I applied for it to study the role of research in policymaking, and the rest is history.
And you've mentioned, governments and Congress, by the way, on even taking that leap forward to move from comms manager to apply for a PhD, and start doing political science. So when you came back, what happened after that?
Right. So I should just say something that my PhD was looking at the role of research in decision making.
Okay.
So that is really like now focusing on the policy making process. And that's where the political science comes in. As I went into the PhD, my interest was to understand the role of research. But as I read more and understood more on how, the political process of decision making, I realized that sometimes research doesn't make any role. And so I decided to just now look at the politics of decision making. And so look at all the factors. Wow. With research being one of them.
Yeah.
So I shifted my focus now to the politics, and that's how the political science comes in, because I had to now look at when you think about research methodology, then you have to take a very political framework, in terms of designing the research, looking at interests, the things that happen under the table, and that policymakers never tell you that this is what changed the decision.
Yeah.
So I had to look at the whole political process. And so research became just one of the things I was looking at. But now I was looking at much more than research, just so that I have a more holistic understanding of the political process. Yeah.
Is there I'm so intrigued by this, is there one thing that you discovered in the politics of decision making that absolutely blew your mind?
One thing.
Are you allowed to say it?
I'm allowed to say it. I wouldn't say it blew my mind. I would say it annoyed me to know that actually decisions can be made when governments know that there is robust evidence requiring them to do this, but then they go ahead to do the opposite because now they're playing the political card.
Okay.
And so they know the research, but it doesn't matter anymore.
That's frustrating. Actually.
That was frustrating. Yeah. And it came through in, so my research I looked at various case studies, I would say. And so one of them, when I'm doing interviews with policymakers and just trying to understand, okay, so what research was used here? Nobody's talking about the research. People are just talking about, these groups, it was about sexual and reproductive health. Mm-hmm. So government officials are just talking about these groups and those groups, and there is, of course, the women rights groups. Yeah, there's the religious groups, the faith-based groups, and then there is the technocrats. People in the ministries, what they're saying, what the experiences with young people and reproductive health, and so you don't hear anybody talking about research. Yeah, and you're like.
And is it because they don't have the research, or they do have it?
No, they have the research, but they're really. Often on issues that are contested, governments want to align or to be seen to be aligning with the majority. And so when you look at the African context, often when it touches on sexual and reproductive health issues, they want to align with the church, the faith-based leaders, because they want to be re-elected. And so the research just disappears through the window and nobody's mentioning it. Just like, the church was protesting, blah, blah, blah. And so we made this decision. And you're like, okay, so this research that we do. And that time I'm doing a PhD. Yeah. I'm becoming a scientist. And it's becoming clear that me being a scientist
your voice
is not enough.
Yeah. Your voice will not be heard. I mean, there's always, I think it's an African proverb. If it's not, I'm really apologizing in advance. But they always say, the loudest baby is the one that gets the milk. So it sounds like with politicians in decision making, it's usual they'll listen to the people who'll push and
Yeah.
make loud voices. We've seen civil society
Yeah.
activists really pushing for different reforms.
Yeah.
Whereas researchers, I don't think they're trained that way. But I want to throw in another curveball to you because
Yeah.
your work is with governments.
Right.
What about private sector?
Yeah.
How do we make sure that industry is also using a lot of that evidence,
Yeah.
especially if you think about return on investment? Maybe for
Right.
them, it might make sense.
Right. So I would agree that private sector has a big role to play. Even when you look at the health sector, private sector provides a lot of services. And when they're deciding to go for services, they go to the nearest facility. They're not looking for government. They go to the nearest facility, and often sometimes that is a private sector facility, and they will go to it.
Right.
And so they have a big role to play. What I would say is that we haven't, the research sector hasn't paid a lot of attention to the private sector. And I think that is a gap.
And why not?
I would say maybe for the work that I've done when I look at AFIDEP and I look at maybe even other research institutions where I've worked, the interest has been very much in changing policy, influencing policy. And the private sector comes in more in implementation, right? So government sets the policy frameworks, isn't it?
Yeah.
And within those policy frameworks, they enable private sector to, provide services, through private mechanisms. And so when you think about the policy framework, you kind of think government. But even as AFIDEP, we are also stepping back to say, okay, we need to bring in the private sector because they're playing a big role in providing services.
Yeah.
And so I think as we move forward, and I would say that like AFIDEP, we've just launched our new strategy. We're calling it Strategy 2030. And one of the groups that we've prioritized, of course, we are not stopping to work with governments. We'll always work with governments, but we want to do a lot more with the private sector to see how some of the work we do can contribute to, the services they provide. But also I think for me, the big thing is also equity. Private sector is often profit driven.
Yeah.
So when you think about equity, you want to ensure that even as they think about returns on their investments, they're not crowding out the poor.
Yeah.
And so how can they ensure that they have various investments that target different groups or layers within community? And so they don't leave out the poor completely because we're in Africa, right? Majority are the poor currently.
Yeah.
And so private sector is great for them to do a bigger role, but then they need to think about how do we ensure that we're not crowding out the poor, who are the majority on the continent. And so the value for governments to come in and kind of moderate, the way private sector provides services. So get into public-private partnerships where there is perhaps even sharing of investments to ensure that private sector providing services that are not very expensive for the poor. So the poor can still pay something but access quality services.
Yeah. I mean, the private sector engagement is a really interesting topic and one that we need to rethink even when it comes to evidence. I love your inclusivity, even with your strategy for 2030. It sounds like it's going to be a good one of bringing different players all together, actually. There's a gap between going back now to the science policy dynamics. There's always or seems to be a gap between researchers and policymakers. What do you wish, researchers knew about turning research into policy? Because it seems that they are not informed, or for them, they stop at the publication at the shelf level.
Right. So I would say two things. One is that researchers need to walk the talk to the end of it. Because the moment I come up with a research question that I want to answer as a researcher, always trying to solve a development problem, right? So I identify a problem, I want to provide a solution through research, and then I end at publishing, which means I end midway.
That's what they've been taught.
I get a publication, I get a good paper, and I stop there. So I'm challenging researchers to walk the full walk, because when I design a research question, my research answers that question. I need to then move to the next level to say, okay, how does my solution that I've provided through my research get to help citizens of Africa? And that comes into being very deliberate in engaging governments, understanding, even from the very beginning of my research question, understanding what is government doing about this problem? What are the gaps? What is the information that government actually needs to address this problem? So that as I get in my research, I'm speaking to those questions and needs of government. And in which case, then I'm working with them hand in hand. By the time my research comes out, they're able to take it on and, get that into their planning, their budgeting, their service provision. And so really for them to embrace their full role of solving development problems, which means you go the whole way, not just publishing, but you actually ensure that you're working hand in hand with governments, and that you're also bringing in practitioners, I would say, because again, government doesn't do everything. Government will do policy and all that, but then there are people providing services, some of them not in government. So I think researchers is thinking really very much about not just the publication, which is fantastic, but how does the solution get to help citizens, which means there is a bigger role for them in engaging.
Yeah. I feel like it's almost unfair that you have almost moved the goalposts for the researchers, and you're now pushing them to go to the last mile,
Right.
which no one told them, or no one. I feel the reason I say it's almost unfair is because as a researcher, I'm a scientist background, so until I did science communication as a master's, I never even knew the bit about communication.
Right.
You're taught to go to the lab, do your test, write your paper, publish it, and then suddenly you're aware, get promoted, right? Even career pathways. I mean, recently, I think I was speaking to a colleague of mine, and they were saying in universities, you get promoted because of publishing papers. No, there's no one who's saying, so which policy did you change?
Right. So actually, I'm not blaming researchers entirely.
Yeah.
Because the problem is, problems are always complex, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so the point you just brought up about researchers, the way they're trained, part of what we've been doing at AFIDEP is to engage academia, universities, and how they think about science leadership.
Nice. Okay.
Because for academia, it's not just ensuring that you have scientists who are doing good publications, but you also have scientists who are engaging governments.
Yeah.
And good leadership means that it's not just my paper, but I'm looking at how does my paper change the lives of the common mwananchi.
Yeah. And the way you can change it is with engaging the
it has to come with engaging governments, engaging now the private sector that we talked about, but even engaging the media to ensure that citizens are hearing about your research. And so one of the conversations I've been having with universities is they need to set up clear units that link their research to government, because you'll find that some universities and even research institutes, you'll find that they have public relations units. And for me, whenever I look at that, I'm just like, do you have a knowledge translation unit?
Okay.
Do you have like a public policy engagement unit? They don't.
Yeah.
But they will have a public relations unit. And so for me, I've been thinking that they probably don't need a public relations unit, right?
Okay.
They need a public policy engagement or a knowledge translation unit that has a clear role of linking their work with governments. Because universities are set up as what? They are set up as
knowledge
government think tanks.
Yes.
They're supposed to be the think tanks, the ones who think for government.
Of government,
But then you don't think for government and leave it in the library or in a journal.
Yeah. I mean, and how did we get here?
Right. That's a very good question. I think to a good extent, I would say that a lot of the models in Africa, we've kind of taken them and pasted them, like cut and paste from the West.
Or maybe legacies of colonialization.
Or legacy of colonialism. And I think that where we're moving right now is as starting to own our development and challenging some of these models.
Yeah. Is it changing?
It's starting to.
Okay.
It's starting to. I'm saying that because of some of the conversations we've had with some leaders in universities, in some leaders in research institutions, and they're seeing the value. We've done some work with the Kenya Medical Research Institute over the past, I think, 3.5 years. It was a grant which ended, but the work was really useful. Engaging their leadership to say there's value in them strengthening their knowledge management unit. So they very well set up a knowledge management unit in 2017 or 2015. But then I think there wasn't a lot happening. Partly it was maybe because of funding. But of course, whenever you don't have funding, it's because it's not a priority. Yeah. And so us engaging their leadership to say this unit is actually very central to the reason why KEMRI was set up.
Yeah.
Because KEMRI was set up to be the research arm of the Ministry of Health. How does it ensure its research is getting directly in the Ministry of Health? They need that knowledge translation unit.
Yeah.
And so engaging them, and actually through that engagement, they put researchers in that unit.
Oh, nice.
And that unit is now starting to be actively driving knowledge synthesis, evidence synthesis, engagement at national level and at county level. So I think there is value. Of course, it's only scratching the ground. Yeah. There's a lot more that needs to be done, but there is value in people seeing that indeed strengthening engagements with government is so critical, the research that we are doing.
Okay. I mean, I really like the whole capacity strengthening and directing on change or introduction of new departments into institutions that actually need departments you'd have not thought of.
Yeah.
Again, back to our research on you, I think this was an article that you had put together for Ministry of Health, and for us to discover that they only had 3 people who are generating the knowledge. And maybe as we go to the next question, maybe you want to explain why research is important. Like at the Ministry of Health, for example, why is it important for them to have a knowledge management or a public policy department? Like, does a ministry need new research? Isn't it okay that they have good guidelines, the guidelines work? Why would they need such a department?
So the value of this department is to make the links, because so the unit for research, I think it's called Research and Innovation Unit at the Ministry of Health, or it used to be called that. I don't know what it's called right now. But the value of that unit is not for them to do research. It's for them to strengthen the links between ministry and research institutions. So the links between ministry and Cambridge, ministry and academia, the various universities doing research on health. And so our engagement with that unit was not necessarily to ask them to do research, but it was necessarily to ensure that they have people who can synthesize existing research. Because often when the leaders in ministry are asking questions, like saying we need to make this decision, and so we need data quickly, they need someone with ability to do a robust but quick research synthesis, to quickly come up with maybe a 2-page or 3-page to say, this is what is coming out of the research that has been done in Kenya on this particular issue. And so our engagement with them was to strengthen capacities around synthesis, analysis, not necessarily them doing primary level research, but them finding the research and synthesizing it quickly and providing it and packaging it in a way that they can provide it for decision making. And then, of course, just them ensuring that they have clear links with the likes of Cambridge, the likes of universities, the likes of NGO research institutions like AFIDEP, APHRC, so that when the minister says, I need this, they're like, oh, there's this expert at AFIDEP whom I can quickly call and bring on board for them to answer questions. And so it just becomes critical to have that unit, because they also coordinate within the ministry to track, like, what are because the ministry is huge. And so them coordinating to understand what are the research priorities for the different departments in the ministry, and then link those priorities to the different research institutions doing that research. And so they need a unit like that for largely coordination and championing evidence and doing synthesis and packaging, but not necessarily doing primary level research.
Okay, that's understood. Can you give us an example of where that department has been very vital, even in terms of changes of policies? It could be in maternal, neonatal, child health, sexual reproductive health, even malaria, some of the diseases.
So actually, the work we're doing with this unit at the Ministry of Health also happened just during the pandemic period. And so it was interesting because we had started partnering with that unit, of course, years before. We started partnering with them as AFIDEP since 2013. But then 2019, we got a new grant that just gave us more energy to do some more work with them. And then 2020...
Perfect timing.
the pandemic happened. And this unit just takes on the challenge of bringing on board researchers to help the ministry. Because, the epidemic was new. Nobody knew anything.
It would have come.
And so even the ministry realized that we need researchers. And that department was central in bringing in like experts from, the research team at Cambridge Kilifi. They did some synthesis for the ministry to guide how the back to school, remember schools closed, abruptly. And so the government had to come back with a way of how do kids go back to school, how do we open schools? Now that unit, the unit for research at the ministry, is the one that linked up with the Cambridge Kilifi researchers to do those analyses and help government determine, the MOH determine how do we advise the Ministry of Education on going back to school.
Because I remember they were like peas in a pod, actually. That's the two, Cambridge Wellcome Trust, Kilifi, and MOH at the time.
So the unit took the leadership, to bring in the researchers and work with them to provide the synthesis the government needed to come up with that. So for me, that was like a quick example. It happened very quickly. It didn't happen over many years. It happened very quickly for them to just reach out and say, can we do this quick analysis to support the ministry, to provide the Ministry of Education on guidance on how they go back to school happens.
No, and good for you and also good for AFIDEP for laying that foundation, because it's the foundation that was then used, during the pandemic. I want to shift gears a little bit. Let's go to population. Again, it seems that AFIDEP has been focused, and maybe I should have also said, I used to work at AFIDEP.
Right.
back in the days, lived many years. AFIDEP has really focused on demographic dividend.
Right.
Every time we hear those two words, we
Yeah.
think about population. Why is the emphasis on controlling population, reducing the number of children born, as
Yeah.
opposed to creating fantastic conditions so that, people can thrive, the youth?
Yeah.
We've seen the Gen Zs protesting a
Yeah.
lot. Some of that has to do with unemployment rate.
Yeah.
There's no conducive situation.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and then maybe you could talk about also population and climate. And
Right.
that's climate.
Right.
Yeah.
So I like your question on why focus on population control and as opposed to focusing on how do we enable youth to have jobs. So I just go back to the whole paradigm of demographic dividend.
Yeah.
So the paradigm is really about enabling governments to invest in ways that they harness the youth, the youth bulge,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because, as Africa, we have this very huge young population.
Yeah.
And so the demographic dividend wasn't so much about reducing fertility. It was very much about what do you need to do with this huge population of young people? What do you invest in as far as education is concerned, as far as job creation is concerned, as far as industry is concerned to create jobs, but also health is concerned to ensure that people are actually healthy. Now, the reducing birth rates comes in because we are talking about affordability. Affordability in the sense for government.
Okay.
So let me look at it for government, but even I'll come to the family level, but even for government, because when you have this very huge, the African population structure is like a triangle. The base is really big.
Okay.
And the people at the
Small
base.
babies, small
Yeah.
babies. Okay.
So the people at there's so many people at the base.
Dependents.
Yeah, who are dependents. And so if government spends all the money there, then where are we going to get money to invest in creating jobs? So the idea was for us to be able to actually invest well, to harness the demographic dividend, which is what comes out of having a lot more people working in the working age group, therefore driving the economy, was for us to ensure that we are able to manage the base.
Yeah.
So that we don't always have so many people at the base, then it's not affordable. We'll just keep investing in that level. And yet we need to have the money to actually invest in more job creation. So it was very much about affordability. And then I'll come back to the family level. So you have an income of 100 shillings and you have 20 kids. And there's a person with an income of 100 shillings that have one kid who is able to invest better.
Of course, no-brainer.
So it was really about that.
Yeah.
But also I think the important point about it was that as Africans, our population will not stop growing very soon. So if our worry is about population growth, the demographers say that, the experts in population say that we already have the momentum for population growth for the next 70 years.
What?
Yes.
70?
Yes. Our population will continue to grow for a very long time. Why? Because the base is still huge.
Okay.
We still have a lot of babies down there. Those babies are the ones who are going, the momentum. Yeah. So we have the momentum. So we should not even worry about population growth. It's going to continue growing for a long time.
Okay.
What we need to worry about is enabling. The point about enabling people to have fewer kids is to enable them to have kids they can actually invest well in, take better care of, take them to good schools, so that we are producing a population that can drive economic growth.
But then, okay, and then what is to be said about government once the family level, the parents have taken care of the children, such that they're also able to find the jobs that the government has then created?
So the government then is really prioritizing creation of quality jobs.
Yeah.
And that comes back to having the right policies around industry, for instance. I was in a dialogue yesterday, we were talking about youth employment, and someone from a government agency said that they're so tired of us focusing on importing everything.
Yes. Yeah.
Importing everything. It's like we import everything. We import a full computer. We don't focus on assembling computers. We import everything.
Cars.
So how are we going to create jobs?
Yeah.
And so we need like, it almost seems to be like radical change for us to look at how do we create jobs here. Then look at exporting young people to go to some countries to do manual jobs when they're highly trained. Right?
Yeah.
So the government needs a shift in terms of how do you create quality jobs here? And we need to think about industry. Of course, the service sector is coming up as important, but there's also industry will always remain important. So how do we deal with issues of avoiding importing everything? Because when you start assembling things here, then you create jobs for young people. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I love your use of the phrase radical shift because in the sense, this needs to be driven and driven very quickly by government.
yeah.
The other day I was playing around on Instagram, and I was looking at the Singaporean case. Somebody was
Right.
giving the parallels between
Right.
Kenya and Singapore
Yeah.
back at independence.
Yeah.
And the shock on us, if you look at Singapore, I mean, crazy. The GDP beats US hands down, UK,
Yeah.
so it's very impressive. But I think it also boils down to leadership.
Right.
And it sounds like there's a lot that needs to be said to that. Over the years, as you've worked in this sector of knowledge translation and engaging policymakers, what are the things you like? Like, what's a story you could share that for you has left a memorable imprint, that inspires somebody to say, actually, this is a career pathway that I'd be interested in?
That's a very difficult question. I would maybe shift to say stories that have inspired me into what I'm doing today. So it's not necessarily my experience, but it's a story that I look back at, and I look at it and I'm like, I didn't even know about it, but that's what I want science to do, And so for many years, I've admired Wangari Maathai.
She
This
comes up
Kenyan,
a lot. Conversation here.
She's even said to be the first woman to have a PhD in East and Central Africa.
No, stop. Really?
Yeah, she was the first woman to have a PhD.
Gosh.
So if you have a PhD in the 70s, she had a PhD in the 70s, maybe even before you were born. If I was born, maybe I was a few months old or something.
Yeah.
But so this is a scientist who then moves on to become an activist. He's not a scientist who stays in the lab. I'm not saying the lab is bad, but for me, her story always inspires me, because when you look at that lady, what she achieved as a scientist who moved into activism and working with women at the grassroots level to drive conservation, for me, that always inspires me so much. And I'm always like, science can be transformational like that.
Yeah.
You can actually be a top scientist, and she was, but also be on the ground working with women who've probably never gone to school and drive a movement at that level. Because some of us get those PhDs and we are like up there.
Yeah. You'll never see us coming down. No. Up the ivory tower. Yeah.
And you don't solve problems like that, development problems especially. So for me, that always inspires me. And sometimes I wish I could be that. I'm not that.
Yeah.
I probably never get there, but she just inspires me. Every time I think about her, I smile. I'm like, whoa, what humility, but also what urge and focus and commitment to change.
Okay. I mean, and as we're wrapping up, I want to touch on that point of Wangari Maathai and her ability to come down, and work with the villagers, work with the community, work with everyone across sectors, even at some point she was in parliament as well. The same question I asked you for industry, as much as we say, yes, evidence is for government, but we know the people who can hold government to account are citizens.
Right.
How do we make sure that we are also in the element of inclusivity? How do you make sure that we are also giving or empowering citizens with the evidence to hold their own governments to account, to actually feel that they do have a say, that their say is does not only come every 5 years. 5 years. At the ballot, right? That's the only say I have, and that's it. I'll be mum till the next 5 years have passed.
Right. So actually, when I think about institutions like AFIDEP, I keep thinking that once citizens are empowered and they take on their role of holding governments to account, then AFIDEP doesn't have to exist.
Wow. Okay.
Because it means that citizens will be looking at evidence, they'll be looking at data, and they will own their own development. Because part of what AFIDEP tries to do is to say, you have a budget of, 100 billion as Kenya. These are the problems you need to be solving. And we think you should put money here, not money there, to ensure that you are solving problems that affect majority of your population. I'm giving that as an example. As AFIDEP, we have a small voice because we are a research institution. Government can choose to listen to us or not to listen to us.
Yeah.
Imagine if all the citizens of Kenya came up and said, and it's happening.
It is.
That's what the Gen Zs are saying.
Yeah.
Why are you renovating State House, spending so much money renovating State House?
Yeah.
And you're spending such little money doing everything else that could make a big difference.
Right.
Those are the analyses that Gen Zs have been putting up. And so I think that citizens have a central role to play, not a marginal role. And I say that as a citizen, we've kind of taken a backseat for a long time and let institutions technocratic institutions, of course, where AFIDEP even falls, be the ones engaging on our behalf. But they can never have that strong voice that we can have as citizens, you know. And so I would say that part of what we've done as AFIDEP, we look at governance, which is an important issue for citizens, and we collect data across the whole continent on governance issues.
Yeah.
And through that work, we actually release a scorecard every 2 years to just show us where are we as far as governance is concerned. And when I say governance, I mean like how are our parliaments doing, how are our judiciary doing, how are decisions being made. Even we touch on issues of procurements, like how are governments managing procurement, how are governments managing elections and the whole electoral process. And so we do that, but I still think that there's a lot more. And I like it because with the whole digitization revolution going on, it's putting a lot of tools in the hands of citizens.
Yeah.
To track
empowerment.
spending, to track how government is spending, and just to be able to also engage. And so I think research institutions can do much more engaging citizens, but also that there are also a lot of tools that citizens, if they organize better, can actually hold their governments to account better by tracking expenditure, tracking commitments, tracking how corruption issues are being handled. Because sometimes there are news about corruption issues and then they die there. What is the role of citizens in that? So I think citizens have a bigger role to play. We are not playing it. And I don't think that research institutions will be the ones that will solve our problem. I think as citizens, we need to harness the tools that digital possibilities are putting in our hands to hold our governments to account, because it's our money they're spending.
On the indicator, the Africa Integrity Indicator, which countries tend to come up as always the top countries that we can look up to and say, there's things we can borrow, and which one's at the bottom, if you're allowed to say that too? Is Kenya at the bottom?
I'm actually not allowed to say that, but the scorecard always has. We actually, I think every time we release the scorecard, we talk about the top 5, and the top bottom, and we do it because it's evidence driven, because the scorecard shows you who's where, so it's not like you're hiding. That is the data you are showing. I would say that it's not easy to say which countries are always at the bottom, because again, we are looking at different things. So sometimes countries will be doing very well on, like I know some countries do very well on women representation, which is a big governance issue. And then when it comes to other things around democratic rule, then they go down. And I won't even mention names, but I think countries
I was about to throw one in there, but now let me keep quiet.
But we know that there are countries so countries often it will be like they're doing very well on certain things and not on others. And so sometimes we actually, and that's I think what the decision we're making to do in the next scorecard that we're releasing later this year, that we focus more on specific issues than releasing a composite scorecard that pulls everything together. Because sometimes it gives the view that some countries are doing very well, and yet that is an average. When you look at some of the key components, you're like they're actually not doing very well on others that are key. And so we are now starting to focus more on, I would say, maybe thematic, like on more on issues, so that we kind of rank countries based on the issues, that as opposed to saying we are ranking you as a composite, which includes everything. And so now you're coming up with an average.
Which is not a true picture.
It's not a true picture. Because like some of the countries I'm thinking about who are often shown as doing very well on certain things, it may be that they're doing very well on several things. But when you come back to some central things like authoritarian rule, democratic rule,
they fall
down.
Rose, we've come to the end of the podcast, but we want you to leave us with something. And this is, who are African scientists that you look up to, or science leaders that inspire you? You can say 3. They don't have to be necessarily in your area of expertise. They can be across, climate, agriculture, technology, innovation, anything.
So actually, I already started answering that question when I talked about Wangari Maathai, because
you're not allowed to say Wangari Maathai because everyone gets away with that one. Everyone says Wangari. I know. I feel like she's just, surely we have others that we can.
Yeah. The problem is they're not very well known. So
which is good. And this is why we ask this question, because we want to be able to give them visibility and shine light on them as well.
So that is a very difficult question, because then the ones I'm going to mention may not necessarily be those that are not very well known. So I'll mention...
and they don't have to be Kenyan also.
A scientist who has... Maybe I'll mention just 2, actually, that quickly come to my mind, who have inspired me. and inspired me perhaps because they focus on problems than just the science. So
Yeah.
one of them is Dr. Elia Zulu, who is my boss.
Yeah.
He's inspired me a lot because he's a great scientist, but he's very keen on the science making a difference in people's lives. And that's part of the reason why he founded AFIDEP, because he wanted to have a research institution that works differently and works closely and hand in hand with governments, and to ensure that whatever research they do is actually geared towards solving specific development priorities or needs. So he's inspired me in that way, because I don't believe in doing research for research's sake. I think research is great, but it should provide solutions that change people's lives.
Right.
So he's inspired me to say that you can actually be a top researcher, but move away from that and come to start from zero because you want to change people's lives. The next one who has inspired me in this space, when I think about science leaders, I have to say, and this one is well known, but allow me to say it, because I believe in science and innovations.
Yeah.
And this one, and bless his soul, because it's passed on now, Callistus Juma has inspired me a lot.
Yeah.
Because he really believed in science and innovation and the place of that in Africa's development. Because whenever I think about the work that he's done or he did on the continent, we tend to talk about science and innovation in documents and publications. And we say things like, if you look at a lot of government policies, we'll say things like, we want, our policies will be based on science or something. But then when it comes to practice, like, what are you really doing in terms of investing in that science that will change your development story, or investing in innovations? You don't get to that. Now, why I look back at, I find Callistus Juma's story inspiring for me, is that he really did a lot in engaging with governments. Not just standing there and saying innovations is important, but he was involved in various structures on the continent just to ensure that you're promoting innovations. And I think he also founded one of the leading research.
I think ACTS, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
And he founded a couple, actually, including his own very foundation.
Right.
Yeah.
So he inspires me because he's someone who moved beyond just the science and being a scientist and publishing to actually be in the action, be in the middle of things where you can bring about change. That's why he inspires me. So I think I'll probably leave it there, because I might just continue mentioning the same inspiring story, because they moved out of their science to impact people's lives. Yeah.
Okay. Rose, thank you so much. That's your camera, so your parting shot.
It's an honor to have been on this conversation, and I really look at the work that I do as something that should make a difference in people's lives. I enjoy my work. But I think for me, every day I wake up is the hope that I will do something that is improving the lives of people. And so being on this podcast makes me hope and believe that I'm contributing to that process. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Rose. We've talked about radical shifts across sectors that governments need to do. We've talked about last mile, researchers needing to work and sharing their information and engaging policymakers and also citizens up to the last mile. And then also we've looked at the politics of decision making. That's not to assume that sometimes our research or facts information will be used for proper decision making, but it should not stop us. You are a good example of staying the course. Now you're deputy director, so congratulations so much.
Thank you very
on your
much.
recent achievements.
Thank you. Thank you.
Last Friday. And for us here, we want to say thank you so much, and thank you for tuning into Connecting the Dots podcast, a product of Silent Global, an African strategic science communication collective. If you want to find out more about what we do, look at all our social media platforms, CTD Pod Africa. And as usual, remember, every single idea starts as a dot. It's what you do with it that changes the game. Stay curious, stay bold, and keep asking the question why. Thank you.